Today's Podio solution webinar is leveraging GenAI inside of Podio. We are going to talk about GenAI's impact on work and workflows, the tools you will need for this integration. Joel will walk you through exactly what you'll need, a step-by-step walkthrough of the setup, going through some use cases and where to get help.
Let's go into a couple things here just to help level set and help you get started on this journey using AI with Podio if you haven't already. So first thing we want to do is let's talk about the tools that we'll need to make this work. Now, this is one of many ways that we're going to show how Podio can be integrated with an AI model. There's obviously many models, many different ways to do this. This is just one of many. As with anything in Podio, there's probably more than 3 ways to do the same thing. But in this case, we're going to need a few things. One, obviously, we're going to need Podio, and we're going to need the Podio Premium plan because we are going to leverage Podio workflow automation to help us integrate to OpenAI and ChatGPT. I'm using ChatGPT Plus to be able to call the OpenAI, I think it's the completions engine, and leverage the API key to do that. And then finally, I won't go into too many of the details, but we are going to leverage a solution called ProcFu. It helps extend scripting power of Podio workflow automation. We're going to use it for just a couple of actions in our workflow that you'll see. So what we'll cover, we'll walk through in the demo kind of the initial Podio configuration, show you how we've got the apps and the data set up. We'll talk about how to obtain an OpenAI API key if you're not familiar with that already. Probably where we'll spend a bulk of the time is walking through the workflow automation setup, because as you'll see in the next slide, that is really what's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting in helping us get information from Podio over to OpenAI. And then in turn, getting that response from OpenAI back over to Podio. And what's really cool about this setup is once you've kind of got it in place for one use case, it's really easy to start to modify it for other similar use cases. So we'll talk about not just one, but a few different use cases that we've got set up today. All right, so finally, before we dive into the demo, just at a high level, like I said, what the general workflow that we're going to see today looks like is we've got a Podio app, or actually 3 Podio apps that we're going to leverage. From the Podio app, we are going to trigger an action inside of workflow automation. That action is going to be really focused on getting the information from Podio and sending it over to OpenAI. So like I said earlier, we're going to use the completions API within OpenAI. We're basically going to send it a topic and a prompt, and it's going to build us our result. Now, what's really cool about that is in the same workflow, we're going to grab the OpenAI results and bring that back to Podio workflow automation. Then we're going to parse that response in Podio workflow automation to send it back to Podio. So again, it's a pretty straightforward workflow. When you see it demoed for the first time, which is what we'll do first, and then we'll kind of go into the bits and bytes of how we put it together, it's actually pretty straightforward. All right, so let's hop over to our environment. And let's first just kind of walk through the general setup. So like I said, I've got 3 different use cases, 3 different apps that we'll look at today. So I've got an app called Job Postings. The whole idea here is that, for example, you've got a team and their job is to collect all these, job recs that have been requested, build the job postings themselves, get them reviewed and approved, and get them posted for candidates to apply. Another one that we've got is a root cause analysis. So one of the things that I'm sure many of you have found is, tools like ChatGPT and others are really good at helping you start to solve a lot of technical problems, and definitely helpful in starting the troubleshooting process. So we've got, a use case set up around root cause analysis that we've actually seen with a couple different customers be really successful. The final one that we'll walk through is really just the team meetings. So all that really is, as you'll see, is a meetings app where we've got different meetings with different notes. And really all we want to do is summarize those notes have a couple of different takeaways come back in terms of action items, and then have Podio create tasks for those specific action items. So we'll go into each one of these as we go through. Now, when I talk about the setup, on the Podio side, the other thing we've got here is this app called GenAI Settings. And so what I've done here, if I go ahead and open this up, is I've got one item that's just called GenAI Settings. And you'll see here, I've got a couple of different prompts. So again, knowing Podio and Podio workflow automation, there's always a number of different ways that you can do these things. But what we're doing here is we're staging our prompts that we're going to use for each of these scenarios in a single app. And we will call on this app from the workflow in order to go send the prompt and the topic over to ChatGPT. Now, one thing I also have in here, it's in a hidden field. You'd see it if I created a new one, or actually you wouldn't. I do have a hidden field that's got my API key. So there's a hidden field here, which just has the straight text to my API key. You'll see that show up in the workflow as well. All right, so let's go through and let's actually just show you how one of these work. This is probably the easiest part of the demo because we're just going to start with kind of the end result. So you'll see here, if I'm looking at job postings, I've got a number of these postings. Some of them you can see have descriptions. There's a couple that are still in development. What I want to do is, let's say, I've got this one for financial analyst. And let's say, I'm Zach, I'm the job rec owner, and it's my job to kind of understand, not just what are the things that my organization offers, in terms of things like benefits, the things we're looking for in terms of qualifications. But I'm also on the hook to work with the person who's requesting this job posting to understand what the requirements are, right? A lot of times what that can mean is there's a lot of back and forth, especially to develop that content. So what we wanted to do in this example is we wanted to create the ability to auto draft the job description. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here and we're going to click auto draft. And what this is going to do is this is going to run our workflow that we'll go into in just a couple of minutes. It's going to take our job title and it's going to take the prompt that we just looked at a second ago in our GenAI settings. And it's going to pass that over through Podio workflow automation to the OpenAI completions endpoint. And in turn, what that's going to do is bring back our job description. So what's really nice about this is this doesn't even have to be a finished product per se. This just has to be something that I, as the job rec owner, can look at and say, okay, now I kind of get a feel for what this role should look like, the responsibilities. I can make some modifications to this. And then obviously leveraging Podio and Podio workflow automation, then we can kick things off to the next step, and do things like set it up for approval. So I can move it to review, and in turn, that should mark everything ready to approve and create a task. So again, it's really, really kind of helpful when we're talking about being able to quickly build a draft, of content and use that rather than spend a lot of time researching and building that by hand. So even though that was pretty straightforward in terms of the trigger and the information coming back, what I want to pivot to now is going into workflow automation itself and walking you through that setup. So let's come on over. That's the RCA one, apologies. And let's grab our flow for the GenAI job description creation. And let's start right up there. Okay, so as you saw, this is really just a simple trigger. We're doing this based on the item being updated. So again, we've got that field called auto draft description. We want to trigger this so that when that field is set to auto draft, it kicks off our workflow process. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to search for that settings item that I had placed our key and our prompt into. So all I'm doing here is just a general search action. I'm going and looking in the general AI settings app, and I'm looking for that single item. It's pretty straightforward. So the next thing, now that I've got that information, is I'm going to use a variable and put together our prompt. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm matching up our prompt, the text of the prompt that we've got in our settings app, along with the job title. The next variable, I'm just setting up the content type. So we know that OpenAI expects to see this in JSON format. So what we want to do when we send this over, and you'll see in a couple actions down, we want to define our content type to be able to pass this information over to OpenAI. All right, so the next step here is we're building our parameters. So what this means is we're going to put together our JSON to send over to OpenAI. And in this part here, we're going to grab our prompt, but we're also going to tell it which model we want to leverage. So we're going to leverage GPT 3.5. We've got our prompt. Again, that came up here. That's our prompt text plus our job title. We're going to grab that and include that. We're going to dictate, what's the maximum number of tokens that we want, to have. And then finally, we're going to set the temperature, which really just means we're going to set the level of creativity, that we want the response to have. So again, as you build these things out and kind of play with these, you can start to play with, some of this stuff in terms of moving the temperature up and down, getting a feel for how those responses look, and really dialing those things in. Okay, so the next part we're going to leverage is we're going to leverage an action called capture result of a remote HTTP call. So really what that means is we are going to take the information that we've put together up until this point, and this is the action that is going to send that information over to the OpenAI API. So what I'm going to do in my header is I'm going to grab my content type variable. So that came up here. I'm going to grab my authorization. Again, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, I've got the API key that I've got set up right now. I've got that, in that settings app, and I'm just calling that token here. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to call this response. I'm going to go ahead and post this to the OpenAI completions endpoint, which is this URL right here. And what I'm going to send that endpoint is our params, is this variable right here. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking all the information from Podio in these steps, packaging things up, and in this step, sending these things over to OpenAI to start looking at and analyzing. Okay, so once it does that, now we need to grab the response from OpenAI. So OpenAI is going to return everything back to us. And what we need to do is we need to decode that response. Since GPT's answer comes back encoded, this is the reason I've got procfoo involved in the mix. Procfoo's got an action that's called base64 encode. And what that's really going to allow us to do is it's going to be able to let us take the response object coming back from GPT, decode it, and clean up the result. So what this does basically is it makes it really easy for us to get the information out of the response that we need and then pass that forward to another variable inside of the workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the information as it comes back. I'm going to pass that forward so we're able to grab the text, and we're going to call that our result. And then our result is what I'm going to pass back to Podio in that field of job description. So I've got my variable result. I actually just added a step to unset the field, for the button, just in case we want to use it again. But at that point, my flow is set up. And I'm now able to grab information from Podio and pass that through workflow automation to OpenAI, grab the response in the same workflow, and pass that back to Podio. So again, once you have these things in place, it's pretty easy to then, replicate this type of thing for other use cases, which we'll walk through in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of that. And let's come back, because one of the things I also want to do, just in case people are wondering, is I do want to touch just real quick on the OpenAI API key. So if I jump over to OpenAI, I'm in a test account here. You can see I just created a new secret key. So again, once I create my account, I've got access to ChatGPT Plus. I came over and created my API key. That is what I then saved to that hidden field in my settings application. ProcFu, like I said, there's a lot of functionality that ProcFu provides. We could probably do a whole separate webinar on that. But like I said, what I'm using in our workflow is the base64 encode. So you can see here, it's just making the return JSON safe to use an additional workflow automation or Globiflow variables. So again, that allows us to keep everything in one single workflow and keep things clean. Now, once I had that set up, like I said, I thought, well, that was cool for job postings. How do I do this for something like root cause analysis, right? So this is a little bit different use case. This is something you might see in manufacturing. And you can see in this example, we've got late deliveries and quality holds. So something's going on there. Customer orders are being delayed because parts are stuck in quality inspection due to inconsistent measurements or failed tests, right? A lot of times what will happen is manufacturing customers will have different methods that they like to use for root cause analysis, but sometimes they just don't know where to start, right? Especially depending on the piece of equipment or the specific issue. Despite having a root cause analysis framework in place, somebody's got to sit and figure out, like, where would we even start troubleshooting this thing? So one of the things that we found with different customers is they will leverage what's called the 8D framework. And we've embedded that into our prompt here that we'll use to generate a root cause. Now, what was cool over here is we were essentially able to copy this flow over to root cause and just make a couple modifications to retrofit it for this use case. So again, if I come in and look at this workflow, everything's going to look very similar, right? I've got my, my trigger. We're doing this again on an item being updated. When we're changing a field, basically when we're hitting the initiate button, we're going to go get the information from our GenAI settings app. We're going to put together our prompt that we want to send to OpenAI. We're going to define our content type. Again, we're sending this as JSON because that's what OpenAI is expecting. We're going to build the params that we're going to send over. So same exact thing. We're using the same model. We're grabbing our prompt. Even though this is a different use case, we're using the same max tokens, same temperature. And then we're following the same process to send this over to OpenAI. So if I crack open the headers, everything's the same there. Same endpoint. We're leveraging our variable for parameters. And then we've got our steps here to capture the result, the JSON that's coming back from OpenAI, and then parsing that back into something that can be read into Podio itself. So again, the overall flow is very much the same for this use case as it was for the job postings use case. So let's take a quick look just because I want to show you the prompt for this one because it obviously is different. Our prompt here, what we're going to tell it is we want to use the 8D problem solving methodology and we want to analyze the following issue encountered in our operations. So this is just giving some clarity and context to the way that OpenAI is going to interpret our query. The nice thing about having this in an application is if you are testing something like this and you don't quite like the way that things are coming back or you want to dial things further, having your prompts, in a separate application or in another location in Podio really makes it easy to make those modifications. So you're not digging through all of your workflows saying, okay, like I got to go find the workflow for, the RCA workflow. I've got to find the prompt, update the prompt in the workflow. I can just go to one central application in Podio, see all of my prompts, and be able to update them all right there. So same thing as before, let's come over and let's go ahead and initiate the troubleshooting. And if the demo gods are with us, what that should do is, again, send this to OpenAI, and it should bring back a response that follows the 8D framework. So here we've got our troubleshooting recommendations. Again, as with anything AI related, you're going to want to look at the response. You're going to want to interpret the response. This is really just a framework to help us get started. So if we take a look through this, the 8D framework, each D has a number. If you're not familiar, there's certain steps you take to start troubleshooting and getting to a root cause of an issue. But you can see as we start to go into these things, it is starting to look at the specific issue we had and bring some recommendations in. So, when we get into identifying and verifying root causes, the 5 whys, it could be machine, it could be man, it could be method. We want to start looking at that and thinking about how we might now go solve this problem. And again, having access to, a Gen AI model right within Podio really helps us streamline that workflow so that as the team is here working on this RCA, they're not having to swivel chair over to another solution, run a bunch of analysis and do it. They can do it right here in the context of the work that they're on, and have the response brought back in. And once here, obviously, with anything Podio, we can go update these, collaborate with, our team members and get their feedback and kind of take the workflow forward from there. All right, so let's hop over to our last use case. So our last use case is something we see quite often with AI models is we want to summarize meeting notes, or we want to summarize some kind of data. I missed a meeting or I wasn't there. I basically need to know what was the main point of the meeting, what were the big topics, and then, in turn, what are the action items that we need to take coming out of that meeting. So this application is really simple. It's just a team meeting application. And the context I did is we're a design shop. We're holding all of these different, design project meetings. So in this case, this is a meeting relative to a coffee shop. This was with a client. I just put in here client or internal. We've got our meeting time. We can see the project manager and the meeting attendees. Despite what the notes say, Joel was a no-show on this. Zach was the only one that attended the meeting. But basically what we can do is we can leverage a very similar setup, an extended setup and workflow automation that we just looked at, to not only grab a summarization, of these notes, but also get from the summarization what the 3 action items or the 3 top action items might be, and convert those into Podio tasks. So the way I've got this set up, and we'll kind of go through the workflow and look at it, is the same thing. I'm going to hit summarize meeting. It's going to take our meeting notes. It's going to go look at our prompt over in our Gen AI settings app. It's going to bring me back a summarization of the meeting notes, more in the format of an executive summary. It's also going to identify, here's the top 3 action items, and it's going to create those as Podio tasks and assign those to our project manager. So let's go ahead and summarize meeting. And we'll tempt the demo gods one more time here. All right. So here we can see it brought back our summarization. So our team discussed the concept for a new coffee shop. It'll be cozy and modern. Sounds great. We've got some of the other pieces in here about sketching an initial layout. But what it also did is it said, these are the action items that we're going to need to take. And if I do a quick refresh, we'll see those were then parsed into individual Podio tasks that were all assigned to our project manager. Now, if you dig into this and you start building these things out and kind of playing with the framework, you'll see that you're able to go in and probably do things like I want to assign these to specific people based on role or based on some other piece of information within this application and the application's data. So I've got my 3 tasks here that were created. The final piece that we put in is, this is all cool. Anytime we have a meeting like this, the team lead wants to know, what was going on and be kept up to speed. So rather than type out, the debrief and the tasks, I can just hit send meeting notes. Again, leveraging workflow automation, this will go ahead and send an email. There it is. So it sends us a nice email grabbing our information and just letting the team lead know, hey, here's the summary from that meeting. Didn't matter that you didn't attend, it was fine. Here's what's going on and the next steps coming out of that. So again, just to kind of reiterate, the whole idea of getting started with Gen AI in the context of Podio is Podio is already really good at collaboration. It's really good at workflow automation. Now it comes down to what are the pieces of our process where we can further streamline, and automate certain steps. So again, looking at the three that we had here, these are just three, right? Job postings, maybe that's helpful, maybe it's not. Root cause, maybe helpful, maybe not. I'm sure as you sit there and think about all the different ways that you use Podio today, or you and your customers use Podio today, there's probably, half a dozen of these things that jump out where it's like, we do spend a lot of time kind of doing back and forth or research or, trying to figure out what to do with a lot of different pieces of information that we're tracking in Podio. Building in, the generative AI workflows really helps you continue to find areas where you can streamline that. And like we said earlier, really get a lot more productivity and value out of tools like Podio and Podio workflow automation.